Hi, everybody. Let's give it another minute or so as people come into the room. I see the participation number rising. While we are waiting to get started, I'd like to remind everybody when you have questions, or if you have questions during our presentations or during our discussion period at the end of this, after our presentations, we're planning on to have about 30-minute discussion of our panelists. Please post your questions you can post them in the chat, or you can post them in the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. So thanks everybody for attending our session called Rethinking Downtowns. My name is Gus Shearbaum. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at Department of Streets at City of Philadelphia. And I'm very pleased to have guest speakers as part of our panel from around the country. We're first going to hear from Mike Amsden. Mike is a multimodal transportation manager for City of Milwaukee, Department of Public Works. We are then going to hear from Anique Badeau, who is an urban planner, and she is Assistant Director with Austin Transportation Department. After that, we'll hear from Dongho Chang, who is the City Traffic Engineer for City of Seattle. And then lastly, we will hear a presentation from Kelly Yeaman, who is Director of the Office of Complete Streets for the City of Philadelphia. So with that, I'm going to, before I do that, I wanted to quickly ask you to participate in a Mentimeter poll. So if you would go to your cell phones and or whatever, get on the online and go to menti.com. And there's a code to enter. Let me share my screen so you can see this. The code is 4214023. If you enter that code at menti.com, you can tell us who is in the audience. And that will help inform our panelists of the audience that we have here today. We have a lot of engineers I'm seeing. We only have one planner in the room. Wow. Okay, two. Great. We have a manager. No Penn State people, no educators. Okay. This is great. I have one more mentimeter.com question. And I'm going to see if I can just press the arrow and go forward to the next one. Thanks for giving us your results. This is a word cloud. Again, go to menti.com. You should now see how are you rethinking your downtowns? And if you enter words that first come to mind in terms of how you are rethinking your downtowns in the current state of the world in like the past year, please share your words that come to mind in this word cloud. Huh, that's great. Multimodal, heavy on multimodal. Walkable. That's great. Wonderful. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're just gonna, this is pretty cool. Lots of really interesting words: transit-oriented, smart, outdoor use, bicycle-friendly, accessible, safer, repurposed, walkable, multimodal, and smart are the big ones. Pedestrian-friendly, accessibility, on-street dining, that's a good one. Okay. Car free, huh? Interesting. Accessible. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to turn it over to Mike Amsden. So over to you, Mike. You can share and give your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Gus, and everyone for having me. My name is Mike Amsden. I am the Multimodal Transportation Manager for the City of Milwaukee's Department of Public Works. Let me pull up my presentation. I assume you can all see it at this point. So today I'm going to talk quickly about, kind of tell a little story of Milwaukee's transportation system, how it's been designed historically, what that design and what the historic intents have meant in 2020, and then what we are doing in Milwaukee to move Milwaukee forward in a people-focused way and moving away from really trying to design our streets and our transportation systems to the peak 15, 30 minutes each day. So like many cities, Milwaukee's transportation system focuses on bringing people to the downtown core. Our transit system is county run, county-wide, but many lines run directly to downtown. We have a streetcar system that launched a couple of years ago that runs right through the heart of downtown and connects neighborhoods on the near north and near south sides of downtown, bringing people to jobs and various destinations. Our interstate system, like most American cities, also brings people to the doorstep of downtown or also cuts through downtown in many ways. And the image you see on the right here is, if you've been to Milwaukee, it's the Marquette interchange. Some people consider it an engineering marvel. Many people consider it the cause of many ills of Milwaukee, including things like displacement and job loss and separation of neighborhoods and really kind of ruining the urban form of Milwaukee. On the map on the left, you can see the Marquette interchange where the four legs of the interstates come together. Downtown is immediately to the northeast here. To the northwest, which is the direction the images or the photos looking, is Marquette University. The Menominee Valley is to the southwest, which is a industrial and recreational area in the city. And then to the southeast is the Third Ward and Walker's Point neighborhoods, very desirable, walkable neighborhoods. But all of those areas are separated by our interstate system and very difficult to navigate. What this also has means is that as that interstate system, which is designed to bring people to the downtown, Milwaukee doesn't have a peak hour. We have a peak 15 minutes or peak 30 minutes at most, both in the morning and the afternoon. But there's a huge influx of people driving into the downtown during those brief periods each day because we don't have a regional transit system. We have the bus network, but we don't have a regional rail system. So primarily people from the outskirts of the region are driving downtown. So those three locations you just saw result in situations like this, where our most vulnerable users, people walking, really cannot access destinations, are separated from things like our lakefront neighborhoods like the Third Ward are separated by interstates that fly overhead, and entertainment venues such as the Pfizer Forum or where our NBA team plays are inaccessible. These are crossings of anywhere from 90 to 130 feet. Many of these lights don't even have marked crosswalks. It also means that people biking don't have access to the downtown area. Our trail system in the county is actually pretty incredible. We have a fantastic trail system, but as you see here, as you get to downtown, that trail system and our bikeway network really falls apart. The trails are shown in red. It gets you very close to downtown, runs along the perimeter of downtown along the lakefront, but unless you're a strong and fearless person riding a bike, you're not going to be able to safely navigate our downtown streets. What does that mean in 2020? Like most cities, our traffic volumes have fallen tremendously. At the peak of the pandemic in spring and early summer, we saw traffic volumes drop by upwards of 70%. To this day, we still have empty streets downtown. These photos were taken Wednesday afternoon at 4 p.m. Very little life in terms of automobile traffic downtown. That lack of traffic has resulted in some pretty negative impacts. One, although we've seen a 70% decrease in traffic at its peak, total crashes, although they've gone down, have only gone down 15% through the end of October. But even more importantly, and more critically, our fatal crashes have actually increased by more than 50% in 2020 compared to 2019. We've seen an increase from 40 through October in 2019 to over 60 this year alone. And that's primarily the result of really high speeds that we're seeing with far less car traffic on our streets. On the other side of the coin, we're seeing a huge uptick in bicycling, however. Our county trail system has seen an over 40% increase in people using our Oak Leaf Trail year over year. Our city trails, which aren't as significant or connected, but we've still seen a 15% increase in ridership on our city trails. And then our bike share system has seen a decrease in overall ridership, but an increase in the percentage of people who live in Milwaukee using the bike share system, a significant increase, that is. So from learning what we've learned in 2020, we're really focusing on reprioritizing our downtown streets and moving away from designing to a 15-minute peak period that we've done so historically. We're repurposing space, redesigning streets, incentivizing healthy transportation, and really putting an emphasis on connecting our trail system. Few examples, like many cities, there's a lot of outdoor dining happening. One unique thing that we've focused on here in Milwaukee, which I love and I wish all cities would do, would have done previously and continue to do going forward, is allowing dining through the winter months. Previously, we stopped allowing outdoor dining after November 15th and required sidewalk cafes and parklets to be brought in. We're now allowing outdoor dining with fire pits and ventilated covers, et cetera. We also took this as an opportunity to really redesign our streets this summer through resurfacing programs. So taking 2-lane or 4-lane streets, quickly converting many miles downtown to 3-lane streets, a traditional road diet pattern. We also have several one-way streets that focused on getting people in and out of downtown. This summer, we converted several one-way streets to 2-way, in, again, that traditional road diet pattern. Our bike share system has really tried to encourage people to ride a bike for health, for safety reasons, and to have a way to get around in a safe manner that maintains physical distancing. Bubbler Bikes gave out free passes to county residents in June and September, and saw 3 times the number of people utilize that option than they had anticipated. And finally, we're really putting a focus on connecting our trail system. Like I said, we have this amazing trail system that gets people close to downtown. So some of the things we did this summer, our Active Streets program, or Slow Streets as it's called in many cities, we prioritize locations in areas where we could connect residents to our trails, connect residents to parks, and also can get them to the trails so that they can access jobs and destinations in our downtown core. We're also working with Rails to Trails Conservancy. They put out a 7-county regional trail network called Route of the Badger. And on the right, you can see what that looks like in downtown Milwaukee. Again, the red are existing trails, which get you close to downtown. The green are the proposed on-street connections to connect those trails. We obviously want to connect those trails with all ages and abilities bikeways so that people can feel safe and comfortable riding their bikes through downtown and connecting to our trail system. So we're doing things like this on Kilbourne Avenue, which we did this summer, removing a lane of traffic, removing angled parking, and putting in all ages and abilities protected bike lane. So that is a few of the things we're doing here in Milwaukee, and I will turn it over to Anik.
Thanks, Mike. Let me share my screen. Hello, everybody. My name is Anik Baudet, and I am with the City of Austin, Texas. I'm an assistant director, as Gus pointed out, with the Austin Transportation Department. And I have an MPA from Penn State, so happy to be here today. Excuse me while I am going to share screen mode, which is not, there it is. I don't know if anybody in the audience has been to Austin, Texas, but I thought I would start with, let's see. Don't know if anyone's seeing my screen. All right. So Austin is in the heart of Texas. It's the state capital. It's all home to the University of Texas at Austin main campus. We're known as the live music capital of the world, also known as a city within a park. We have a lot of brands. But as an urban planner, the brand that I like to talk about is that we double our population like clockwork every 20 years. And we are approaching 1 million in population. When I moved to Austin almost 40 years ago, we had 250,000 residents. So that growth has put a lot of strain on our transportation network, as well as other infrastructure systems. So in April of 2019, we did a comprehensive update to our city transportation plan, and it's been coined as being perfectly bold. And I'm really proud of that. And what we did is we set a goal with the community to move from a 74% drive alone mode share citywide to 50% in 2039. And as what you can see on the screen for today is the breakout. This data is from the American Community Survey of how that mode share is broken out today with regards to sustainable modes compared to drive alone. So as we crunch data to look at forecasting with our transportation plate, we started to crunch numbers, and we found that with the addition of people that we expect by 2039, if we can achieve a 50-50 mode share, meaning 50% of people driving alone peak hours or during commute, for their commute, and 50% doing something else, whether that be a combination of telework, bicycling, walking, transit, that we'll be able to keep people moving through Austin, that the congestion that we're experiencing today will be about the same, but we will have doubled our population. So keep that in mind as it's important to what we're doing in the downtown. So we, in the transportation department, we have recently taken over most transportation development review functions from our development review department, who used to do transportation review, the majority of it, and we've gotten much more sophisticated with our engineers and planners. And we've actually established transportation demand management reductions for certain areas of town. And what you're seeing on the screen in red is our city core, or our downtown area, where the target there for reduction of raw trip generation from developments is 40% with a maximum reduction of 50%. And we are taking what we call a TDM, Transportation Demand Management First approach, to all developments that come in with the reduction targets and maximums as you see on the screen. We're really trying to manage our transportation network. Austin, like many cities, does not have a lot of street network that we can add to. And so we've got to make our streets work harder and be more multimodal. So hence our transportation demand management first approach to development review. So I'm telling you this because we expect our largest mode share shift to happen in the downtown area and in the urban core, which is the orange. We have a nodal growth concept plan in our comprehensive plan for the city for land use. So the orange spots are what we call, they're nodes of where we'd like to focus the growth over the next 20 years. And the downtown and those orange areas are really where we hope to skew a high percent of a change and a shift in mode share in commute hours in order to bring along the rest of the city. As you can see, the yellow and the gray, that is more suburban, which, you know, doesn't have, those areas don't have as much transit and not as much connectivity. And so we're really needing to focus in the downtown and in those orange urban core areas. So that's where the urban design, Congress Avenue Urban Design Initiative comes in, which was a huge initiative to reimagine our main avenue in downtown Austin. That's our capital there, towards the back of the screen. The street, if anyone's been to Austin, it is the main street of Austin, and, you know, shoot straight south from the Capitol building about 1.3 miles. So we set out to create a planning process to rethink this avenue with a lot of partners. And it's very important that it become a multimodal street. The existing conditions, as you can see, are not very multimodal. There's 6 lanes in each direction, and angle parking, and pedestrian amenities. We have done well in that area. I will mention that in this 1.3 stretch, 2 of the top 100 worst intersections for safety on our whole transportation system are in this 1.3 stretch. So from a Vision Zero standpoint, this was, we had a lot of work to do on reimagining Congress Avenue. We did an extensive study, and a link to that study is in, I don't know if these slides will be available later, but is in my cover slide. But we looked very extensively and modeled 3 models: a 5-lane section with parking, a 5-lane section with flex parking, and a 4-lane with parking, each with unique trade-offs, as you can imagine, to improving the multimodal street. So here I'm showing a rendering of the most aggressive option that was considered, which is the 4-lane option. It has 2 motor vehicle lanes in each direction, retained, no left turn bays, parallel parking, insets, a protected bicycle lane in each direction, and generally a 23-foot sidewalk, which varies. So here's the space allocation from the existing conditions to that most aggressive 4-lane model. And you can see we've added bike and scooter space that doesn't exist now. We've added a bicycle lane, which is surprising. I mean, Austin, our bicycle network has been, we've been implementing that over the last decade at a very good cadence, but not on our main street downtown. So we have an addition in the 4-lane section of bicycles and scooters, and the parking is reduced by about half. So here's what it looks like. The initiative outlined a $70 million capital improvement, but with the COVID traffic conditions, we were able to do a $250,000 quick build project, which you see here. And I know for you engineers in the audience, which is the majority, typically we don't want to put angle parking with a bicycle lane. And that was a topic of big discussion. We were getting a lot of pressure from advocates to put this facility in, to try it out during the lightened traffic period during COVID. And our decision to do it was based on, it's not a typical narrow bike lane, it's 10 feet wide. And also because bikes are currently in this space and squeezed closer to the cars, and there's no awareness if they're coming because there's no markings, what so have you, to alert the drivers. And so again, we turned the $70 billion into a $70 million into a $250,000 quick build project. Here's another photo once this was during construction, as we were still laying out. So you can see the vast change there, especially in scooters. And that's all I have. So thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, my name is Dong-Ho Chang and I'm the City Traffic Engineer for City of Seattle. Um, Talking to you about building really great communities. Obviously, we visit cities and we live in cities and we live in social settings, and so that city building is really important. Our street design and laws and how we enforce really are opposite. So we designed our streets to focus on vehicle movement and efficiency, and we have to really think about who is excluded in this type of streets. We all have these type of streets. This is a street in North Seattle where sidewalk is disjointed, and that family that's walking through there by law will have to cross the street because what it says is that you have to walk facing traffic. Um, and so we create this environment where we create racial disparity in terms of who gets enforced, who's excluded in our communities. African Americans represent 7% of Seattle's population, but they historically have received 26% of the jaywalking tickets. So really think about the conditions that we create in our communities and then how we solve that. In Seattle, we developed a different paradigm, really thinking about our streets and then where they're placed and then thinking about how they function. And we developed a target speed to really have speeds of vehicles conducive to the activity on that street and that to minimize injuries if there's a error that does occur. And then if you can create your streets that reinforce that behavior to a driver, you will create a safer street environment for all users. In Seattle, we have 2,400 miles of residential streets. They represent 60% of our network, but they only represent 10% of serious injuries and fatal collisions. And when we look at our these streets in Seattle, what we find is that 20 miles per hour speed limit reduction without any changes, just the signing themselves. We reduced all collisions by 20% and reduced fatal serious injuries on our residential streets by 37%. And at intersections where collisions does occur, by introducing simple devices like these traffic circles, we have 1,200 traffic circles. These traffic circles have reduced injury collisions by 97% and all collisions by 90%. So this is a before and after of a street that leads into downtown. Dexter Avenue is our highest bicycle ridership corridor and one of our high transit ridership corridor. You can see the before picture of what that street looked like. Our complete street paradigm really looked at prioritizing transit as the mode, and then accommodating the mode that we want to encourage in the future, which is walking and biking. And so we repurposed that 4-lane street into a 1-lane in each direction with a transit boarding island, having a bicycle bypass through. What we found is that this reconfiguration increased the vehicle volumes by 12%, which is phenomenal. Transit ridership increased by 40%, bicycle ridership about the same, but bus travel time has unchanged and our collisions are down almost 20%. You can create a self-enforcing street design by simple things like where kids are crossing, you want people to slow down. So by elevating that with a raised crosswalk, you can influence driver behavior. And these type of treatments, that driver drives 30 miles per hour on that section, they'll lose a transmission and their underpan, and the next time it'll be 20 to 15. So it's a very, pretty much a 24-hour condition where you can change that driver behavior. Automated enforcement, we don't like to really focus on because we want our street design to have that behavior, but they can be a very effective tool in the interim. And what we find is that every year, the number of tickets are decreasing. You can see that the blue line is the first year that we implemented, and the green line is the last year, 2019. And pretty much 96% of violators who get their infraction, they're the parents. They're the people that are taking their kids to school. They don't receive another violation, and it has an impact overall throughout the day. 71% reduction in all collision during active hours. Automated enforcement red light cameras, the same thing. We get a lot of pushback from our community saying, hey, the revenue generators. And our newspaper said, give us all the data because we know that these things are causing other problems, right? So we gave 20 locations with 3 years before and after data. And what we found is that angle collisions, that T-bone collisions, reduced by 46%. Pedestrian collisions reduced by a third. Rear end collisions reduced by 15%, and all collisions reduced by almost a quarter. Again, we don't want to depend on these, but they're very effective in terms of changing driver behavior. Design that work for all users can serve everyone better. And you can see on this, this a raised crosswalk that connects a new park to a library. And, you know, even though it's a raised crosswalk, I'm seeing in this picture, we made a mistake. We needed that crosswalk to be even wider, right? So families tend to congregate together. We don't want to create these designs. And we all know from the COVID that our sidewalk spaces and where people are walking are really not wide enough to serve our purpose now. And so we really had to think about measuring the right thing as we plan and we develop. We can't go back to the paradigms of the past. And we went from level of service, which is looking at vehicle delays, to Modeshare. That's how our city is going to function in the future and react to common emergency. And so our comprehensive plan, our law pretty much says that we're going to drive single occupant vehicle usage in our city by these percentages. So that's what you see in the right. In our downtown environment, we are driving from 23% down to 18% drive alone mode. And you can see it visually how important that is, that we can't create another deck of lanes in order to accommodate more cars. We can do it more efficiently by putting people on buses, trains, and on their bikes and walking, and that creates space for everybody else. In our downtown, what does that look like? That's 300,000 jobs now versus 235,000 on the east side, and it's very compact. In our downtown, 75% of people are coming into downtown by other modes besides driving alone. So our mode share is 25% drive alone into our downtown. And then, you know, we are really evolving on how we think about speeds. And so we're using target speed as our approach. And just changing the speed limits in our downtown and in our residential streets reduced total crashes by 13% and serious and fatal injury crashes by 20%. What we find is that the 85th percentile, they're about the same, but that over high travel speed is cut by 50 or more percentage. And I will stop there.
Thanks, Dong-Ho. Kelly? Dong-Ho, if you stop sharing your screen and Kelly can share.
So, just pull this up. Okay. So I am Kelly Human. I am the director of Complete Streets for the city of Philadelphia. And let me put this in presentation mode for us. And today I'm going to be talking about reimagining city streets in 2020. So we keep this fairly focused since I've spoke at this or talked at this conference in the past about kind of some of our bigger plans. You know, what's happening in Philadelphia this year. And, you know, this one, it was, I think, a meme that's rung true for all of us, optimism in 2020. And by September, it had us pretty beat down, especially when kids weren't going back to school, at least in the city. So how are streets being used or not during COVID? Philadelphia was one of the first streets in the country to shut down a major street for recreational use as stay-at-home orders came along. You know, we shut down MLK Luckily, we had some gates ready to go, and we're able to easily shut that down to allow social distancing, people to get outside and exercise and do so safely. We also converted a lot of our Play Streets programs to be more robust as camps and schools were not available over the summer, and we saw surging trail use across the city. As you can see at the chart at the bottom, 2019 versus 2020, just a huge number of people getting out and about, walking and biking. We had to pivot on commerce as things began to open back up, but we couldn't go indoors. How are we purposing our street space with street closures and parklets or streeteries, different ways. And now as we move into winter, thinking about what that means in winter. Obviously, we saw the social justice movement, the protests within the city and in cities across the country this summer, and the use of streets for activism. We saw less driving. I mean, as most places in the country, we saw driving and travel in general plummet with the stay-at-home orders, which was great because everybody should be staying at home. And we've seen it returning to it's increasing. It's not at pre-pandemic levels, but it's not happening on the same streets at the same times. We're not seeing the same peak volumes. So it's more spread out and dispersed VMT rather than the concentrated travel patterns we had pre-pandemic. And we've also seen less transit ridership, and it's expected that SEPTA and transit will struggle for the next few years as we wait for either a vaccine and then people adjusting and changing their travel patterns post-COVID. But what we have seen, much like Mike talked about at the beginning in Milwaukee, is a huge surge in fatal crashes as people started leaving their homes in June and then staggeringly in July, and it's continued into August, September, October, November, and December. We've seen a large spike in fatalities to the point we had to make a new chart to be able to accommodate kind of these numbers. We're at it was 114 in October. We had another bad month in November of double-digit fatalities in the city. And we'll see what December brings, but at this point, I'm not hopeful. So these are trends we're seeing across the country and in Philadelphia as well, with the lack of traffic on our roadways that's allowed for greater speeding and risky behavior. So it's time to rethink city streets. We're facing a lot of these major issues, some we were facing before, but they've become more acute and really risen to the forefront with COVID. Our safety, our rising traffic fatalities, the need to support commerce and keeping the lifeblood of the city going, a climate change and climate, what we're calling climate comeback, of how do we ensure that we come back with a climate safe way in transportation, and then equity, ensuring equitable investments and inclusion in the process. So in safety, during all of this, it was time to reestablish our Vision Zero plan. We had a 3-year action plan, and it had naturally become time to write a new one. So we've put out our new action plan for Vision Zero, Action Plan 2025, redone our high injury network, and really set some policy goals you'll see in blue on expanding automated enforcement, allowing local control of speed limits, and passage of the curb bill to allow safe street design so we can build things more easily, like protected bike lanes. So like I said, automated enforcement is a key highlight, neighborhood slow zones, expanding our Safe Routes Philly program for education and improvements around schools, installing 40 miles of protected bike lanes, and installing lead pedestrian intervals at all pedestrian priority locations. So we've also got continuing support for commerce, even as we move out of maybe the pandemic era. We still got to get through at least the next probably 6 months of supporting commerce in our streets. This has been a revolution for how we use streets in, I think, how do we think about pedestrianizing our streets, creating vibrant streets that I think a lot of people have come to enjoy, but balancing that with our transportation needs as we support commerce. But we've got an example of Maplewood Mall on the right, where it's a pedestrianized street, curbless street in Northwest Philly that was just finished during the pandemic. And so will that provide a model for pedestrianizing more streets and supporting commerce on those streets in the future? We've got transit, supporting kind of climate transit through new bus lanes, our transit plan. So we're taking advantage of this time to really look at how can we create bus only lanes while traffic volumes are low, do some piloting, and get out there with these newly established lanes, so people have both safe and efficient ways to get around by transit and by bike. Again, another kind of carbon neutral or low carbon transportation option, looking at our downtown network. How are we connecting both projects we have in the works now, as well as new pop-up locations within the next year, to create a network where people can get in and out of the downtown area and Center City more easily by bicycle. And then as we've been looking at how do we increase our equity, in equitable investment, it actually brings us out of downtown. And we are acknowledging the need to balance both supporting Center City and the kind of pull of transportation into the core with the needs of our neighborhoods, and making sure that we are looking more widely throughout the city in where we're investing in safety improvements. So this is from our Vision Zero action plan, our top locations for future investments throughout the city. So some are in Center City, like East and West Market, but then getting out to Frankfurt and Allegheny and Cobbs Creek, and ensuring that we've got distribution in neighborhoods that need it most. And then through all of this, there's also been a lot of questions around quick build projects and equity and engagement, and how are you bringing people into the process? We've had some major projects under development that needed public engagement, as well as discussions of pop-up and new facilities. So we've been experimenting with explanatory videos and getting to people through short videos, online surveys that we have not done in depth in the past, but have seen phenomenal response to. Maybe we're all just sick of watching Netflix and we'll take the little time to do a survey now. We've had socially distanced in-person meetings where we know there's low digital access. And then, we've supported the Postal Service by sending a lot of mail over the pandemic with postcards and letters in different manners to really fit the style of communication within the neighborhood we're working in. Ensuring that anybody, whether they have digital access or not, knows about the project and can get in touch with us, whether it's by phone, writing a letter, a potential in-person meeting when cases are low, and surveys online if they have digital access. So with that, who knows what where 2020 will take us, but I know we'll be able to pivot and come up with some great ideas on how to handle our transportation networks then. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Now all of us are going to turn on our mics and turn on our cameras, and we're going to have a conversation. I've been told by our Penn State tech support person who's here that we can go a few minutes over since this is the last session, and in case we're having a good conversation. And I wanted to start by asking you all, sorry about that. Can everybody hear me? Because my screen like totally blacked out.
We can hear you good.
I apologize. I wanted to start by asking everybody about something a few years ago, well, several years ago, Philadelphia had a visiting delegation from the Netherlands. And one of the things that they shared that really stuck out to me was the concept that all streets have historically been designed where pedestrians and bikes were basically guests within the public right of way, within the street, not in the entire right of way, but within the street. The Netherlands sought to design their downtowns where a car is a guest on their downtown streets, predominantly designed for bikes and peds. So they were trying to make this paradigm shift. So with new technology that we have today at our disposal and things that we're talking about with new pedestrian actuation requirements at intersections and things like bicycle detection and these technological advances, given those and given these safety advancements for multimodal use, is the COVID pandemic an inflection point where our downtown infrastructure might be designed with motor vehicles being the guest on our busy downtown streets in the US? First person, anybody can.
Sure, I'll take that. Seattle is pivoting really quickly. So what we found, just like you said, Gus, is that with the COVID, we're really seeing a hostile environment. All this space that's available for vehicles, they're not as populated anymore. So high speeds. People who are trying to social distance, they are walking in the street. Businesses that need ability to have outside dining, not having that space. So it is a paradigm shifting moment for all of us to realize, like, what kind of city and street have we built, and is this how we want to continue? And what we're hearing resoundingly from people who are experiencing these streets is that no, this is not an acceptable way for us to continue. Even people who are driving is feeling uncomfortable because they're dodging people that are walking in the street environment itself. And so I think we really need to be thinking about it as a profession and how we build our cities and how we operate cities, changing that paradigm. There are locations where you need to have the throughput, right? So you're carrying goods and movements, but there are places where it's actually a place for people, residential streets, even business areas. There can be a focus on, this is a location where we want people that are in the environment to be primary. And so, yes, definitely. Park Place Market is one where, let's say, it's a pedestrian street, but vehicles are permitted. It's been working really well. But what we're hearing now is that there isn't space for vehicles now. That there is a need for us to close that down. So we're working with our authority to do that, so that it can be closed. So yes, definitely.
Anyone else want to chime in on that concept of shared spaces, Anik?
Yeah, I would just say that I think I agree. Seattle and Austin are similar in that way with what's happening, but there's a disconnect that I'll just point out that I think is relevant, that while the business community, there was a question in the chat about, public engagement and how is the retail and office tenants, how are they reacting in the downtown to this mode shift? And generally in Austin, it's accepted, but there's a disconnect with when we see redevelopment downtown with how much parking we're providing. And that's really, as a planner, as I think 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, I just wonder how that's going to affect our mode share goal. So I don't know the answer to that, but generally the projects are accepted and the sentiment is accepted and people see the benefit. But again, there's this disconnect with the redevelopment that's happening with parking. And as we know, free parking, abundant parking, and even right priced parking is an incentive to driving. Any sort of parking is an incentive to driving. And so how do we change that mindset as well? So that would be my addition.
Yeah, to build off of what Anik was saying, I mean, I think that's one thing that I'll, like the Planning Commission in Philadelphia is that we have been limiting new parking in Center City. And when we, we're looking at kind of recovery streets and what does it mean, thinking maybe we would all be back in the office in June, and what a dream that was. But like, how much parking do we have in Center City if everybody started to drive? And that kind of, it was, there's no parking for miles. You could go and not have enough to allow people to even do that. We would, be facing extreme gridlock. So that's where, the impetus, even, to do more biking, more transit, we're dependent on it. It's a city built around transit from the ground up. We grew up around it in the early 19th century. So there's no pivoting to vehicles anyway. So we've got to double down on our strengths and build the city around those elements.
I would just add one thing that we've become very mindful of here in Milwaukee, and I think it's critical, Gus, to the crux of your question about, can we now look at our streets as, streets that are for walking and biking and cars are for guests? The way we've done it, at least in Milwaukee, and I believe a lot of cities have in 2020, especially downtown, is we've turned over street space to restaurants and some shops, which is good, but we cannot privatize our public space. And that's a big concern, is that businesses love it. They thought there was a lot of hesitancy and resistance at first because of parking. But once they saw how long the pandemic was lasting and how much opportunity it allowed for additional space, it was incredibly successful. I'd argue maybe too successful, and some of our streets now are becoming privatized, maybe not formally, but in practice privatized just for that restaurant or for that bar. And so if a city is going to seriously make our streets public spaces, they need to be truly public and not just for somebody having a drink or a meal at a restaurant.
So how are we all reconciling that issue? I mean, it's lots of these restaurants and businesses are major tax revenue generators for municipalities and for cities. And, it's in their interest, but it's also in the city's interest to have that type of commerce occurring. How are we all reconciling these concerns in other cities?
Well, I think something we've got to start thinking about, and right now we've made it incredibly easy for a restaurant to get out there and get a street closure or streetery. The fees are low, the turnaround time on review is low. We want to support them, and for the next year, I think that's going to continue as we, move past that. And there's maybe a desire for more of this long term. I think that's where you've got to see, like, yeah, this is also a public asset that you're turning over to a private business entity. And what is then, the market value is what is the public value to that? How are you pricing, the use of that asset? Because of course, as a restaurant, I'm going to love this space in the long term if it's like $30 a year. As a public resident or the person who has to maintain that street, that doesn't cover costs. So I think that kind of mathematics is where we're going to have to center ourselves in the next year, is thinking about what is the true value of this space once we get past the pandemic, and need to balance kind of the commercial desire to be in that space and the vibrancy that comes with that, with the responsibility to the public.
Yeah, so Kelly, I think Kelly, I wanted to reiterate the fact that in the public space, it is really for public, right? So is it a place where it adds value to the community? And then if that business wasn't there, what is that space worth? And we find, at least in our urban area, it's where people gather, and that spontaneous interactions that occur. And when we visit places that we want to go, I mean, those are the places that we seek out. It's not a place where we can drive through as quickly as we can, and that's the value. It's a place where, hey, look at this. When I imagine, what is that value to people that use it and that experience it, it's huge. It's not monetary, but it's that experience. It's a desirable place, right? So I would say that we need to think about that value. It's not a monetary value sometimes. It's more of a what's a societal value, and then how do we encourage that more if it's something that the community wants to further.
Yeah, definitely. Mike, you brought it up, but I mean, what's your answer in Milwaukee? Could you take a minute? Because I have other questions here.
I mean, I would say I agree. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, like I said, it's great that we were able to adapt so quickly this year, and it's been a huge positive overall. But long term, in addition to the monetary value, we also need to think about what other code revisions may be necessary to make. You know, when you go to Europe, for example, they don't have, you know, here in Milwaukee, we still make a restaurant put up a fencing or some sort of demarcation around their space. That, in essence, privatizes that space. So how can we revise other areas of our code to maybe allow serving in additional spaces, or allow drinking in additional spaces, or not require fences, so that you do maintain that element of public benefit, even though you have a private service?
Terrific. Anik, there was a question, and I think it's a good one that we wanted to touch on, because I think it impacts other people, things that people were talking about, but it's about the community outreach component. How much community outreach had to happen for the Congress, for your, you know, the Congress Ave projects? Huge?
A lot. This much.
Was it years long, a years long process?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, it was several years. You know, we did an extensive process through a lot of phases of data collection. We had a big team. This was a bond-funded program, so it was well-funded. It was from, I think, our 2012 mobility bond. So it had a good amount of funding for both planning, design, and implementation. And so, like I said, the ultimate deliverable is a $70 million capital project. So the outreach was extensive. Our major stakeholder partners included the Downtown Austin Alliance, which is our main downtown stakeholder that has a mobility and parks and open space committee. And so a lot of it is what we were just talking about, is, you know, the desire to have downtown continue to be a destination. I mean, Austin, like many other cities, saw a huge deterioration of our downtown in the 80s into the 90s. It was just awful. And we had a mayor in 2010 who started revitalizing downtown. It's been great. So a lot of public process, a lot of iteration.
Was the pushback that you were getting, was there a lot of pushback from businesses, or were businesses kind of excited about it? Or did that change throughout the process?
A healthy amount of pushback from businesses about access. More, I will say, older businesses who survived through the 80s and 90s, some jewelry shops and more like old school Main Street type businesses. But the newer businesses, the hip little small grocery stores for all the residential that we've seen downtown over the last decade, we're all for rethinking the street, for more space, for cafes, walking, biking. The scooter revolution was a big hit, like it was to a lot of cities, you know, a year or two ago, or 2 or 3 years ago now. So yeah, a healthy amount of pushback, but we've really honed in on, and I think a lot of other major cities have, how to handle that through doing a proper process, having data, having our decisions really based in data, and being able to communicate that data in a way that resonates with the different audience has been the key to our success, and was certainly the key to this project. And I'll say one last thing is that we proved in the mobility study, which you can access, it's about 100 pages on the website, that if we did nothing, right, it's the do nothing scenario, that it would be awful for businesses and retail and offices if we did nothing. And that was a really good communication. I know that's you know, really obvious to all of us in the room and the audiences, but you gotta do that. You gotta show that no build scenario.
Terrific. I have an more engineering type question for Dong Ho. I was amazed by your stat that you have. I mean, last time I was in Seattle, I saw some of these small traffic calming circles in neighborhoods, and your statistic with the reduction in crashes is terrific, and congratulations. But how does Seattle convey larger vehicles like school buses or a moving truck in a neighborhood, somebody who's moving? How are those larger vehicles conveyed through these small traffic circles that you have throughout Seattle?
Yeah, so we have almost 1,200 of these.
Amazing.
Yeah, and the way that our residential streets are, they're 25 feet curb to curb. We allow parking on both sides. So we got, pretty much as you go through this street, I'm going to make up some time. I'm going to try to cut through, and then someone comes the other direction, you're backing up, right? So if it's a high parked area, you do that probably once, and then you're going to stay on the arterial. And so how do we plan and accommodate for all the utilities? So garbage trucks has to go to there every week, right? They have to pick up. And so we work with our utility at those traffic circles. They accommodate pretty much for vehicles going around on the right side on a garbage truck. If they're trying to make a left turn, they're going to be cutting through to the left. So we permit that to occur. We also work with our fire department because our emergency response is really critical. If there's a fire, Seattle's the #1 place in the nation to have a heart attack. Not that it's something I want to encourage, but our response is phenomenal for our medical one, and they pride themselves on this response. And so we go through all of our network and say, we're going to put traffic calming as needed based on data and equity, but we need to know, for your response, what is the critical item? So the arterial streets, those are the primary ones. They're getting to this residential. And then if something happens, what are their other routes? So we identify secondary response routes, and then we protect those routes. And so we do other things to ensure that, there's access for our larger vehicles. And then of course we talk about, we don't get a lot of snow, but we do have snow incidents. And so we have our plowing routes, all those things that are identified and mapped out so that we have confidence from our residents. As we deploy, we have the data to show the safety aspect, but the operation aspect, how are things going to work?
Do larger vehicles, can they just turn right over the central island on these facilities? Or is it always like a school bus? Don't school buses have to go through your neighborhoods?
Yeah, so some of these locations where it's tight, we actually have different types of traffic circles. Some of them are even just mounds of asphalt, and so it allows the driving through if it's a route that has school routes and school bus access routes. And then the other ones that are so established, that there's a tree that was there that was planted small, and now it's pretty much the entire intersection, and so it's lifting up the panels on the intersection. And so we got to go ahead and rebuild. And that tree now becomes a central focus for the city, for the community there. And so we wind up shaving off portions of the curb space in order to accommodate that turn.
Thank you. If you'd all bear with us, we still have about 90% of our very large audience here in the room. And there's one more question that I think is a good one. And if we could speak to it quickly, and then we'll wrap up. But with streets being converted to other uses, how does that impact people with disabilities or lower income users of the system? Can anybody?
I answered that on. Yeah, I answered that on the chat, and really what we find is that people who are lower income, they have no other choice besides taking transit, or walking, biking. Some people can't drive because they can't afford it, or they don't have the ability. They're sight impaired, so they can't get the license. And so when we provide those choices, we actually serve those communities better because now you have options rather than having to drive in order to function in a society and then moving away in order to be able to function. And then as we do these projects, we always look at safety aspect of it and accessibility. And those are the opportunities to improve accessibility. Because if you make a street better for people who are not in the vehicle, now you make it much more accessible.
Yeah, I'll build on the kind of more temporary build, especially related to like the streeteries and the closures. I think in some ways it is, we've always got bad actors of restaurants out there, but actually with creation of streeteries and hopefully their continued use, in some ways it allows us to move sidewalk seating into these streeteries into the parking lane and therefore preserve the full sidewalk or more of the sidewalk for accessibility. Now it has been with an explosion of outdoor dining, definitely a challenge on enforcement and making sure that restaurants are complying. But this is definitely a new tool for us to be able to better clear some of our especially narrow commercial streets that have very tight sidewalks, lots of restaurant use, and giving restaurants a better space than overcrowding the sidewalk has a lot of potential. And then within our street closures, we've always got our good 10-foot path down the middle of them, if not more, to ensure accessibility. So I think in some ways it can enhance accessibility in ways that we weren't available to us before.
I would say in terms of equity, I think what this year has shown us here in Milwaukee is even more so, we already knew, but even more so how inequitable our transportation systems are or were before the pandemic. In Milwaukee, over 70% of people who contracted COVID were Black or brown. The vast majority of people who ride buses in Milwaukee are Black or brown. And our bus system limited capacity to 10 people, no more than 10 people per bus. It's up to 15 now, but there's still a capacity restriction. So people who rely on buses can no longer ride buses. We also saw for the first time, which if anyone's aware of kind of bike share in general, it predominantly skews very white in terms of who uses bike share. Here in Milwaukee this year, we, based on survey data, so it's not exactly 100% accurate, but over 50% of people who responded identified as Black or brown, which almost was parity to the city of Milwaukee's population. So we saw an uptick in other modes, or people who were more likely to contract COVID or be exposed to it, trying to get around in different ways and needing to get around in different ways. So we really felt that building out a more equitable, we call it a bike network, but it's really a mobility network to better serve our Black and brown communities is absolutely even more critical in 2020 than.
Yeah, we saw an increase in our Indigo Access use, which is an access card is for low income folks in Philadelphia. And that was where we saw growth in the use of our Indigo bike share system, was in people who had that pass as compared to all of our other Indigo kind of fare products. That was the one that really saw a bump during the more early days of the pandemic, and is continuing. So yeah, just to second what Mike was saying.
I could speak with all of you and continue this conversation for hours, because it's a terrific conversation, and thank you so much. Everybody, we did record this, so you'll be able to come back and look at some of these terrific slides from our presenters. And Anik Baudet and Dongho Chang, Mike Amzin, Kelly Yeaman. I'm looking forward to coming back and visiting Milwaukee, Austin, and Seattle. I can't wait to see some of these things in real life again. And anyway, thank you very much. And thanks for this terrific audience. We've maintained a very large audience the entire time. And finally, thanks to Karina Fisher, our Penn State assistant, who was here and helping with the conference in general. But anyway, terrific job, everybody. Thanks again. And hopefully we will all see you again in person next year.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.